Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining yet another episode of Intentwise webinars. My name is Srinath Reddy, one of the founders here at Intentwise. And I'm joined by Ryan Burgess. He's head of growth at Intentwise. Ryan, if you want to go ahead and say hello.
Hey, everyone. Nice to be here. I'm excited to go through the differences between AI and rules-based bidding today.
Let's dive into today's session. Why are we doing this webinar, right? So I think, what we find in the space is that there's a lot of chatter and conversation around rules versus AI-based bidding. Several of you have tried AI from some provider, perhaps hasn't worked out, may have had a sour taste from it too. But I think our objective today is to bring a lot of transparency to what we believe are the core pros and cons and how these two approaches really work. A little bit on my personal background. Before starting Intentwise, I used to manage online marketing for multiple D2C brands with budgets in the upwards of $75 to $100 million. I'm saying all that to say that I've gone through the ringer around building custom AI-driven bidding models. And I think our goal here, and by the way, Ryan himself has been an advertiser too. And our goal here is to really share our experiences, and then also how are we incorporating all of that in what we do here at Intentwise. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan.
Perfect. Thank you, Srinath. Yeah, and just a little bit too on my background. Before starting at Intentwise, I've been in the Amazon agency space for quite some time. So I too have a ton of experience using both rules and AI bidding models, as well as managing bids myself, which I'm sure many of you can relate to. So I'm very excited to share not only how we do it at Intentwise, but also sort of my personal approach to automated bidding. So with that, let's go ahead and take it away with this agenda. So first, we'll cover just a quick overview of rules-based and AI bidding to make sure we're all talking about the same things. We'll go through some definitions real quick. Second, we'll get into an explanation of how AI bidding actually works. So we'll go under the hood of what's in an AI model. How do you program that? And how does it work even outside of the context of Amazon ads bidding? Finally, we'll get into some core differences, the pros and cons between the two approaches, and then give you some information about how Intentwise approaches automated bidding and the solutions that we've built for our advertisers. All right, so quickly, there's two common approaches to automated bidding, I should say. The first, obviously, being automated rules. And think about automated rules as a series of if-then statements within your account, right? And they can be very simple. If a keyword makes a sale, do something, or they can be very complex, where you have a lot of filters and criteria before that rule will be triggered. So rules are very simply if-then statements that you would set up manually. Whereas the second option, an auto bidding machine learning engine, is very different in how it's set up and how it works, where instead of defining the if-then statements and all of the criteria, rather you give it a list of inputs, you define that model, and you ask for a specific output. And the model then decides how to achieve that output for you, instead of you defining that through rules. So let's take a look at an example scenario here. Right, let's say you were an advertiser who wanted to achieve a target ACoS of 10%. If you were using rules, it might look something like this, right? Maybe you have a series of 3 if-then statements where if ACoS is greater than or equal to 30%, you would bid down that keyword bid by 25%. If it's a little bit lower, you might bid down a little bit less. And on the flip side, if your ACoS is less than 10%, you might want to bid up to try to get more volume. And if we look at the machine learning and AI slide, it's very different, right? Instead of these if-then statements where you have to manually define these tiers and the criteria and also the extent of the action you want it to take, on machine learning, we simply provide it with an input, which is historical data, and set an objective, which is 10% ACoS. And that is fed into the model, which then spits out a recommended bid, regardless of where within this range we fall. So I wanted to show an example of what it might look like to set up these automated rules. And this is a screenshot from Intentwise, but it would look similar if you're using a different platform. So first thing that I want to point out is in the first row here, target. So rules can have different targets, right? It doesn't have to be keywords. In many cases it is because you're changing bids. But this is an example, and we'll get into this a little bit more later in the presentation, of where you might use rules not to change bids. You might use them for other things. But once you've selected what you're targeting with the rule, you can obviously pick which action you need to take. It could be a bid change, it could be a status change, maybe you're pausing the keyword. And then you can just set that criteria that we discussed earlier. So filters, you can add as many of these as you need. In this case, maybe I only want this to run on a specific campaign where the keyword has a certain amount of revenue. And then finally, you can tell it the action you want to take. In this case, I want to do a bid change using my average CPC as the starting value. And I want to increase by a percentage, let's say 15%, setting a max bid there to make sure I don't accidentally bid too high with this rule. And then finally, you also have to say what your look back window should be in this case and how frequently you want the rule to run at which time. Now, that's an example of one rule, right? A pretty simple one at that. This is a rule that's going to make a few changes once a day to a certain keyword in one campaign. So you can imagine if you're doing this at scale, setting up rules on its own can be a daunting task. Compare this to AI. Again, this is a screenshot from Intentwise, but it could look similar if you're using a different platform where there's a lot of settings here, but really the only thing that you need to tell the AI model is your target ACoS, this button right here. Putting in 15% there, let the model go do its job and establish the relationships between all of the other inputs and recommend your bid.
And I think just one quick note here, if it isn't already obvious, we as a platform are one of the few in the space that allow for both approaches. You're not boxing into one, you have the flexibility to choose between one versus the other down to the campaign level, but more on that to come later.
Exactly. There are some definite pros to having the option to choose both. All right, so let's get into the specifics of how AI models actually work. I think this is something that at least is very interesting to me coming from the advertising space first and foremost. I know my strategy, I know what I want to implement when I'm changing bids, but I always struggled to understand what is this AI that I'm being sold or that I'm using actually doing? How is it going to replicate the decisions that I would make on my own? And so it's really, really cool to unpack what goes on inside of a machine learning or AI model. I'm going to break it down into 3 components, starting with the inputs used. And this is probably arguably the most important part, making sure that you have the right inputs and enough of them with enough quality of that data that your model can be successful. So in our case, when we're talking about advertising, the inputs are going to be your ads metrics, right? Things like impressions, clicks, conversion rate. Could also include retail signals like your product price or your inventory levels. All of these things can be used as inputs. You feed those inputs into a model and you establish relationships. So you're working with the model to teach it, okay, here's how impressions and clicks work together. Here's how one change could affect the other metric. And then finally, after you've done a lot of testing with that model, you can predict the outputs. So the model is then able to analyze all of your different inputs, the different variables, and recommend a bid to hit your desired target ACoS. Let's take that one step further. How do you actually train this model, right? Step 2 was pretty intense. We have all these inputs, we train the model, and it spits out the result. There's a lot that goes into step 2, which is training that model. Here are the 4 steps. And by the way, this is applicable whether we're talking about an Amazon advertising AI model or really any machine learning model that exists, right, Serena? This is pretty common practice.
Totally. The most recent model almost everyone is exposed to is ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
And they follow a similar approach, and every time we go use it, you're actually training their model.
Yep. It's genius, right? They're getting a bunch of free people to train their model for them. Yep. And I think it's really interesting how that works, guys. So what I'd like to do is just break this down again even further. So 4 ways that you train the model. First, you're collecting and choosing that input data. And like I said, this is really critical. If you're not giving the model the correct input data and you're not feeding it with a high degree of accuracy and reliability, it's not going to be successful, or it will struggle to be successful.
I would just add one caveat there, Ryan.
Sure.
there's lots of inputs, right? There's all kinds of inputs you could be sending into the model. The purpose of the modeling and the purpose of the model is to figure out which inputs are more important versus less. Right. So it's not the idea. The process is not, look, I know what the inputs need to be, and I'm going to send those in. No, the process is I'm going to take whatever inputs that are available and let the model figure out what's more important versus less.
Exactly.
Sorry.
That speaks directly to one of the biggest value props from using an AI model, right? If you as a human could not look at every single possible input and establish all of the relationships at scale. That's one of the biggest advantages to using AI, to your point, Srinath. So choose as many inputs as you can. Everything that you have access to and that you can reliably get should be selected as inputs. Now, second is to create what's called training and test data sets. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. So we would take a set of advertiser data, let's say it's a month's worth of data, and we split it. So 80% of that data is used to train the model. We take 80% of it and we're establishing those relationships. We're making the connections with the inputs. And then we use the remaining 20% to test the model. And so that would be step 3, right? We're choosing the algorithm, we're building that model for the training data set, test. And if we get the expected result, great. If not, go back and make tweaks to the training data set until the test data set is outputting that correct bid value. Mm-hmm. So let's come back to another example. Now that we've learned a little bit more about the differences between AI and rules and also what AI is doing is fundamentally different, let's take a simple example of ad spend being at $100, ad revenue at $500, current bid at $1, current ACoS at 20%, and target ACoS of 10%. In a scenario where you're using rules to manage your bids, you might have a rule, again, that says if ACoS is between 15 and 30%, bid down keywords by 15%. In this case, you're looking to reduce your ACoS by half, so bidding down makes logical sense. However, an AI model might be able to establish that there's a nonlinear relationship for this keyword between the bid and its ACoS. There could be a number of reasons why this might happen, but bottom line is, if your relationship between bid and ACoS looked like this, your AI model could recommend bidding up, knowing that a bid up to $1.20 would result in a lower ACoS. Now, we can get into a lot of reasons why this might happen. I'll cover one example. Let's say that at a $1 bid, you were not getting a top of search placement for this keyword, but at $1.20, you get that placement at least occasionally. That higher conversion rate on top of search placement could be the reason why your ACoS is going down even as you bid more. And again, there's lots of reasons why that could happen, but your rules would not be able to identify this type of a curve the same way that machine learning or AI algorithms could. And that was just one more simple example, but in reality, this is what the distribution of your bids versus ACoS is going to look like, right? It's going to be different for every keyword. And again, this is one of the biggest advantages that AI has over rules when it comes to automated bidding, exploiting these nonlinear relationships between bid and ACoS and leveraging the influence of multiple factors on the outcome of your bid. All right, let me turn it over to Srinath. He's going to cover some specifics about Intentwise's approach to AI and automated bidding.
Yep.
Srinath, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, fantastic. By the way, there's just been lots of great questions, and I think we'll address them all, but keep them coming. They should be this. I think it'll make for a great Q&A session.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll leave some time at the end for sure.
Yeah. So again, just to reiterate, at Intentwise, we allow you to do both, allowing you to experiment with both, and gradually find your way to a place where you're comfortable with the path you've chosen. Let me walk you through what constitutes our approach and what has gone into the design of our bidding models. Yeah, like Ryan covered, there's two options, right? Rules versus ML, machine learning or AI-driven bidding. Next slide, Ryan. So, like Ryan was alluding to, building of machine learning AI models is a continuous exercise, and there's lots of components and complexities that go into that. Now, oftentimes, you also have to account for domain-specific nuances into the way you build your models, right? What I want to touch on is 6 foundational concepts or elements that we account for in the way we have built up models. I'll do a quick summary of each of those 6 on this slide, but I'll do a deep dive into each of these as well. Number 1, submodels. And here the concept simply is, look, not every brand is the same. Prices are not same. Conversion rates are not same. You can't have a single model that serves them all. So I'll talk about that. Dynamic data windows. All that means is, look, not every keyword collects the same amount of data in a given time frame. So those time frames have to vary. Bid capping. This is more to give you some level of control on how rapidly you want bids to change, because that speed dictates how quickly you will gain or lose revenue and gain or lose spend. Recycling of high performers. I'm pretty sure anyone here that is using AI has probably experienced this, where you've got keywords that are doing, or product targets that are doing really well for a period of time. Something happens, they get bid down, and they never come back into action ever again. So, which is why we have this concept of recycling high performers. The 5th piece, which is how do you deal with scenarios where you have very little data, very sparse data. That, by the way, was one of the hardest problems in AI and machine learning when it comes to bid management. I'll dig into that a little bit. And then the concept of bid moratoriums. There are times where we actually had to freeze things and not react to what is happening right at this moment. For example, I'm pretty sure we've all seen the pattern where leading up to, let's say, a Prime Day or a Black Friday, Cyber Monday, 3 to 4 days before, conversion rates drop, usually in a lot of accounts. But if you react and let your algorithm change bids according to that, you run into problems on the day of the event. So we have mechanisms to deal with that. So those are the 6 concepts. I'll quickly run through each of these in the next few slides. So submodels. I think the way our engine is built, we have not 1, but 20 sub-algorithms. And when an account gets connected to Intentwise, based on the characteristics of the account, it is assigned to the right model. And there's a number of parameters that drive that decision, such as like revenue per click, cost per click, so on and so forth. Again, we believe a one-size-fits-all approach is suboptimal, and that is why we have designed it this way. The concept of dynamic data windows, or we also call them dynamic look-back windows. Just very simply put, you will have keywords that collect a ton of data in a 7-day period, but you'll also have lots of keywords where in that same time frame, there's just not enough data and you need a longer look-back window. So we have target level dynamic look-back windows based on the amount of data that particular target, as in keyword or product target, is collecting. Again, if you think about it, this is an exercise that is slightly challenging to do with rules, like trying to set a dynamic look-back window per keyword. It's just hard to do using rules, but this is where ML and AI have an advantage. But we have the concept of, dynamic look-back windows based on the amount of data a particular keyword or target is collecting. So bid capping. So let me explain this with an example. Imagine you have a campaign that is driving a lot of revenue, but it also is coming at a very high A cost, let's say 30%. And I'll kind of provide a stark example. And you go and say, look, I want my A cost to be 10% on that campaign. Most AI models, and rightfully so, usually are going to bid down the keywords or targets within that campaign. Now, the rate at which you bid down is going to determine the rate at which you're going to lose revenue on that campaign. Right? What we are trying to do here is we believe you need to have a little bit of control on that rate, which is where this idea of bid capping or bid profiles comes in. And on every campaign, you have a setting that says conservative, neutral, aggressive, and depending on what you pick, it influences the rate of change. Because at the end of the day, big drops in revenue, for example, is not something you want. So that's so we believe that control has to be in your hands, and which is why we enable this capability. Recycling of high performance. This is a complex topic. As an example, you could have a product that is doing super well for you. You've got a bunch of keywords associated with it. For whatever reason, it becomes ineligible, right? Or it loses a bestseller badge, or something happens where conversion rates really drop, as an example, and then those keywords just get bid down. But let's say the product is back from being ineligible and now it's eligible, or the characteristics as to why the product was doing well in the past are all back, but the bids are not back, right? So, and that may take forever. So we have this concept of paying close attention to previous high performers and at the right cadence, recycling them back and giving them a chance. Okay?
Another example of something that does not work well with rules, right?
Yeah. And by the way, as much as we are contrasting rules versus AI, we're spending a lot more time on AI because there's more complexity. End of the day, we believe, you need to make your choice, and we are here to support both choices. Because this is more about what's AI good at that rules cannot do, and vice versa, right? That's our intent with this conversation.
Absolutely.
Sparse data. This is a good one. In general, as you expand your long tail keywords and product targets, you just have a long list of keywords that have very sparse data, sometimes no conversions at all to make any decisions. This, candidly speaking, is one of the hardest problems to solve. Now, there are theoretically techniques that machine learning offers. One example is there's a term called semantic clustering. And I have an example here, which is, what that means is, imagine if you had a keyword called running shoes, right? It's kind of a head keyword. It collects a lot of data in any given time frame. But you also have a really long tail keyword called running shoes with no laces, size 13, and it's a made up example. But the concept of semantic clustering is the idea that, look, because it has running shoes intent, I can borrow attributes from this head keyword called running shoes, right? That's an example of a number of other techniques. And we do a few things as well around long tail keywords. For instance, if I have a campaign that is performing really well and it has some head keywords, we have a mechanism to borrow those attributes if a campaign is already doing really well, and use those for determining bids on these long tail keywords. But there's a number of techniques that go into that. And to be honest, it's a constant R&D investment for us to figure out this, dealing with this long tail data problem, sparse data problem, as we call it. Bid moratoriums, and this is more heuristic and kind of very specific to our domain, where, like I said, leading up to Prime Day or, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, there's just these periods where conversion rates dip quite a bit, and then they skyrocket on the day of the sales. And the last thing you want to do is bid down leading into those events. So, for instance, we de-emphasize bid downs like 3 to 4 days leading up to big sales events, even if the machine learning algorithm says bid down. It's an optional setting on accounts because not all accounts have the same inflections and seasonality. So you can choose to have this in place. The other example is, like, let's say you have a campaign running using a machine learning model, and then you go in there and make a tweak on the bid, right? We leave it alone for a little time duration. Otherwise, the machine learning model will overwrite your change. So there's this concept of bid moratoriums that we believe is important and is baked into how our models work. So yeah, so those are kind of the 6 foundational elements that are going into how we have modeled our engine. And to next slide, Ryan, and to reiterate the point Ryan was making, building and maintaining a machine learning model is an exercise in continuous expansion of inputs. And so I bucketed them in kind of 3 broad categories. Advertising data, which is, we have spent a ton of time incorporating tons and tons of advertising data. Retail and ops data is something we are making a lot of progress around. I did not mention this at the start, but like if you think about Intentwise's solution footprint, we have an ad tech platform, the Ad Optimizer, but we also have something called Intentwise Analytics Cloud, which is really designed to completely automate and have you comprehensively own all your Amazon and e-com data, which, by the way, can be very painful. But part of the reason why we have made that investment, and several of our clients are benefiting from that, is also to take all that data and leverage it in the way our bidding algorithms work. So, and of course, then there's competitive intelligence. But this is going to keep evolving. And as algorithms mature and as we get more and more data, we expect AI to be getting more and more smart and sophisticated over a period of time. Now, all that being said, there's a few important things to note about AI models, right? These models are not perfect. They are often as good as the inputs. And I believe that in our space, as long as we believe that not every factor that influences a shopper's purchase decision is incorporated into the model, it does require human supervision, right? So that doesn't mean you're looking at every day, but there has to be a mechanism to have oversight on what these AI models are doing. And when they are not working, have a collaborative relationship with whoever your provider is, and kind of figure out why. Because there are reasons why it may not work in every scenario, or there are situations where it has been working beautifully for 3 months and suddenly it doesn't. When I said not working, I mean hitting your goals. But that's just the nature of AI. Human supervision, absolutely essential. Even in our case, for those campaigns and clients that use our AI models, we have a full-blown monitoring process internally where our teams are monitoring outcomes. And if there's challenges, we proactively reach out to our clients and figure out what's happening. And then the last piece here that we have reiterated multiple times is this is very much an exercise of incorporating new inputs and continuously improving the model. It's an ongoing R&D investment for us.
Absolutely.
Now, I did want to kind of share my perspective on, I'm pretty sure where you all sit, there's probably no software pitch that does not involve the word AI. And I don't just mean for bid management, I mean for anything. It's hard to discern whether there is real AI or not in some of these things. So my general recommendation to folks is just ask 2 questions, right? Like one is what inputs go into your model? And 2 is what are scenarios in which your model doesn't work very well and it requires some intervention? And the more candid the answers you get, the better partner you might have at your hand. So I suggest keep these 2 questions handy every time you see a pitch about AI. And I'll tell you, like the second question, one of the scenarios what we struggle with all the time is like when products come back from being ineligible, their competitive mix and landscape would have changed. How do you bring this back to prior level of performance is a challenge for us. And we are constantly trying to figure out how to address that from an AI perspective. But yeah, so I would just keep these 2 questions in mind and handy and pop them every time you get pitched AI. And to bring it all together, right? So we spent a lot of time talking about AI models. I do want to summarize and talk about rules and AI in terms of core differences and pros and cons. Rules are a mechanism to automate the logic you have already defined. Okay. Versus AI is a mechanism where you don't know what the logic is, and you're letting the model figure out what the relationship should be. Rules, because you're automating a logic you already know, the one thing that's super easy with rules is when a big change happens, you know exactly where that change happened. But when you have an AI model running and you look at change history, and sometimes you go, hey, why the heck did that bit go up or that bit go down? That's just the nature of the model, where the model is seeing something that you cannot, right? So explaining changes sometimes is challenging when you have an AI model predicting your bids. Nonlinear relationships. Very few things in this universe have linear relationships. Rules implicitly assume linear relationships. And if you do want to tap into nonlinear relationships, AI and machine learning is good at doing that. Expanding inputs. It's so hard to sit and come up with rules that incorporate every single input, right? AI is good at doing that. And then when it comes to sparse data, how do you deal with situations where there's sparse data? There's a lot of techniques that AI offers. Of course, all this makes ongoing development AI expensive, whereas on the rules side, as long as we give you an interface to define your criteria and targets and set your frequency, rules generally work, right? So those are kind of the pros and cons of the two approaches. And I'll also add that, like, as your spend goes up, the amount of value you can extract from leveraging AI also starts to go up, right? As you get smaller, I don't know that these two approaches yield too many different results, but as you get bigger and bigger, we have seen that the gains can be meaningful. Like if you're spending lots and lots of money every month, if 3-5% improvement is material to you, then you may want to look at the AI path, But yeah, so I think those are some, just a quick summary on differences. And I'm sure the follow-on question is, okay, so in what scenario should I use one versus the other? I have some thoughts, but I know Ryan has been the advertiser himself and thought about this quite a bit.
Yeah.
Ryan, I'll let you have a crack at that.
I think you really nailed it, Srinath. The biggest thing for me is the predefined logic in relationships. When you know what you want to implement with your strategy, rules make a lot of sense. I'll give you a couple examples. If branded defensive campaigns are really important to you, and you always need to make sure you're winning that top of search placement on your brand name, you could set a rule just to keep bidding that up in case your impressions ever fall, or in case your organic rank dips, or anything like that. Another example could be like search term harvesting, right? If you know that you want to harvest any search term from an auto campaign, if it's made at least one sale or whatever your criteria are, and that's never going to change, great, set up a rule, let it run. It'll take all of those actions for you. And I think in my experience, I use machine learning and AI on what I call my foundational campaigns. So to your second point, Srinath, AI works great when you have a lot of data in the campaign. I like to take, and I look at every advertising account this way, but I break it into two groups: my really strategic sort of experimental campaigns and my foundational ones that manage most of my spend. For foundational campaigns, they're pretty dialed in. Usually performance is pretty consistent. We have a lot of spend going through it. So I use AI to make sure that I'm getting the most optimal bids on all of those keywords. It's not going to make, huge changes one way or the other. Those campaigns are pretty dialed in already, but I will see pretty nice efficiency gains if I use AI as opposed to rules or manual bidding. And on the flip side, for the remaining 20% of my campaigns where I'm trying to do something a little bit more experimental, maybe I'm pushing harder against specific keywords or competitors, rules can help me do that. Day parting could be an example where rules are applied to turn on or off my bids or change them at certain times of the day. So I think looking at your account and splitting it up into, okay, where are my foundational campaigns where I'm not necessarily making a ton of changes to the strategy, but I'd like to see if I can get more efficient. And then where are my experimental campaigns where maybe I can automate some of these actions I'm taking manually right now by using rules.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more point, and then we'll get into some of the questions that have been asked. The peripheral to bid changes, there's also the need to maintain a clean account structure. There's also a need to continuously expand long tail keywords. No matter which approach you take with bids, there's a need to automate certain things like search term harvesting, or potentially, hey, pausing products that are running out of inventory, or hey, raising budgets on campaigns that are running out of budget. So the idea of automating some of those tasks that are not bid management oriented, but peripheral to bid management, that stays no matter what. So whether you use rules for bids, there's definitely an opportunity, and perhaps an important one, to be leveraging rules-based automation for those peripheral things, justify.
Absolutely.
All right. So there's lots of questions. But let's attack a few of these. I'll read out the question, give you the answer. Ryan, you could do the same. One of the questions is, can this model be used to optimize tacos towards a certain goal? Basically, look, the models are built where you can build a model with the objective as achieving ACOS. You can build a model with the objective as achieving tacos. The only trickiness with tacos is that there is more than just advertising that goes into tacos, which is your overall revenue. But outside of that complexity, I think it is a matter of basically setting your objective variable as tacos instead of ACOS, but it's very much doable. There is also other nuances, like sponsored brands does not have data at a product level. Only sponsored product and sponsored display have data at the product level. So how do you determine tacos, right? So there's some nuances to that. But generally speaking, from a modeling perspective, yes, you can use tacos as your output metric.
Srinath, I have another one for you. How long of a period does it take for an AI to typically gain footing? Is it a few days, weeks, months?
So in our case, what happens is that, first of all, when we connect with your API, right away we get 60 days worth of data. And so because of that, from our platform perspective, we're able to start making changes within a few days based on existing models. The training and learning is a continuous exercise. And the way we approach it is when we are trying to experiment, right? So for example, I'll tell you, one of the things we have tested and it works well in a small number of accounts is today, a lot of the bidding models optimize every keyword to a certain ACOS. One of the things we are finding is that, hey, maybe that's not optimal, right? We want to optimize a collection of keywords to a certain ACOS so that some will be up, some will be down, but together they maximize revenue for you, right? So that was a concept we wanted to test and train. It took us about 30 days to really test it out, beta test it in a few cases, and now we are rolling it out to everybody as an optional thing. So the training element depends on what are you training it for. Sometimes it's 30 days, sometimes longer. But as far as, let's say you connect your account, are you going to start seeing AI-driven changes right away? Usually, yes, because we get, again, we get 60 days worth of data as soon as you connect. And of course, you might have keywords that just don't have any data. Those will take a little longer. But often, the predictions start to come in fairly quickly within a matter of days. There's a question here. It says, do you feel that each AI platform has a meaningfully different model, or are they all pretty much the same? I think this question is more about competition versus us. The reality is this, right? As much as I want to tell you that we are inventing the next algorithm, nobody is inventing algorithms. They all exist. Algorithms is the work of R&D and research scientists that have been around a lot longer than even the Amazon advertising space has. Where companies like us invest time is tweaking the algorithms and ingesting domain-specific characteristics into these algorithms. That's where we invest our time. Nobody is inventing a new algorithm. Okay. So to the question of, are the algorithms the same? Look, there's all kinds of algorithms. I mean, if you're familiar with machine learning, you could names like XGBoost, random forest, decision trees. These are all different types of algorithms. We may all be using different kinds of algorithms. Nobody's inventing an algorithm. Certainly not us and not our competitors. So, but we do spend a ton of time training it, thinking about what inputs to use. In a funny way, we say like our job is to go hunt for input variables all the time. So we are in the journey of hunting for inputs. So I hope that answers that question. Let's see. Is there any? There's a question here. Is there any interaction between AI and the rules engine? The thing that we don't recommend doing is run rules-based changes and then also have AI making changes to that, right? So I think that we absolutely do not recommend. Just maintain separation. Frankly, you could run some campaigns on AI and some campaigns on rules. That's a choice you can make. But I wouldn't do both on the same thing. There's been some exceptions, like for example, if you want to specifically set up some day parts, let's say you want to bid down between 12 and 2, and you want to do that as a rule, you could do that. In theory, the algorithm could also be doing that. And those are kind of rare situations. Although that being said, rules can be used on items that are peripheral to bidding. So setting up automated rules to do your search term harvesting, moving search terms that match a certain criteria from, let's say, auto campaigns to sponsored products, sponsored brands, sponsored display campaigns automatically. Those types of things you can absolutely do and should do, and that can work in conjunction with the machine learning driven bidding model. How far along are you in developing AI for CPM bidding? I think CPM, another word is like, cost per impressions, right? So just FYI, I think in particular, it's going to come super handy when it comes to DSP management. DSP APIs have had some limitations in the past, so there's not a lot we could do. We just started working with a new API, and I think as we work through that, we fully expect to be investing a lot in CPM-based bidding, certainly around DSP spend. So it is definitely in our roadmap to go build on.
Srinath, we have a question a little bit further down on the list. They said, one big con of AI to me is that it's almost impossible to troubleshoot.
Yeah. And there's also a question about what kind of reporting is available for AI changes. So I think let's tie them together. I think you're right in the sense that how do you troubleshoot, right? So first of all, by definition, you're chasing a problem. And to me, let's just first define a problem. Let's make up a problem, right? So let's say the problem is, look, your year-over-year sales are down, or that all of a sudden your ACoS across your campaigns is up by 20%. Let's say that's the problem. The way we recommend you go about this is that has nothing to do with what AI you're using. Well, it does have something to do with it, but it'll come at a later stage. But step one is figure out what is the source of the problem, right? And we have this concept called what changed analysis. You want to quickly get down to understanding what campaigns are driving that negative change, what products and what keywords. Like, you need to do that very, very quickly. But once that is determined, then you can work with whoever your partner is on the AI modeling side to figure out what happened. And look, any platform worth its salt today will have extremely rich change history, like certainly on Intentwise. You can go back and see exactly what change happened on what keyword at what time. Change histories are all there, and I'm sure other platforms have that too. But the idea is, once you have isolated where the problem is, then you can dig in and work with a partner and figure out what is causing the problem, if there is one. While I said that it is not easy to explain, I do think you can work with a partner to kind of dig deeper and understand what may have caused it. But I do agree with you, like troubleshooting around AI is going to take a bit longer than troubleshooting a static rule where you know exactly what happened and why.
Is there a campaign structure that's most effective when using AI?
Okay, cool. Let me repeat this question. There's a question here that says, is there a campaign structure that is most effective when using AI? So there is a lot of philosophical debates and differences on this topic. We have competitors like Quartile that have the most granular structure, which is a keyword is a campaign, right? So, and it's a concept called SKAG, single keyword ad groups, which originated back in Google AdWords days. I mean, if you Google SKAG, and you'll find articles and a lot being talked about from 15 years ago. So like, that is the most granular setup you can have. Now, a structure like that, what is useful about that is now all of the campaign settings, let's say placement settings or what have you, because you just have one keyword, you can treat them as keyword settings, right? So there is a benefit to that. But what I find is there is no situation where there is no cons, right? So the problem with that approach is you get massive account bloat, right? And you also get away from this idea that I don't necessarily have to optimize every single keyword to an ACOS. I have to optimize a collection of keywords to an ACOS, and that's actually gives me more revenue. So that's there's a pros and cons there. But generally speaking, what we find is, like, at the least, not cluster a bunch of products together in a single campaign. Like single campaign, single product campaigns is definitely a base structure that we recommend. Now, there are also reasons to get away from that and have a collection of products in the same campaign, but at the least, single product campaigns for sure. So I think our philosophy on campaign structure, by the way, we don't force a campaign structure on you in the way Intentwise operates. Okay, so you can define your campaign structure, but we certainly recommend product level granularity on a subset of keywords. Definitely have single keyword campaigns. But whatever you do, it has to be a structure where if there is a problem or if you want to analyze performance, you should be able to do it in the shortest time possible. Don't get to a place where you have no control on the account and you've got this magical AI doing things for you. That's a bad place to be.
I think we maybe have time for one more question. We might not be able to get to them all live, but we will. If you signed in and we have your contact information, we will follow up with the answers to your questions. Yeah. Do you want to take one more live, Srinath?
Yeah. Let's see. There's so many questions.
What about, this could be an interesting one. Does it make sense for Amazon to start implementing AI on their side, which could significantly affect or break other AI tools like ours?
Oh, yeah. Great question. If you look at the Google, if you look at Google history, they've done that, right? They've introduced sophisticated algorithms. And you can rely on them if you wanted to, right? I think it really just boils down to how should I put it? Like, what goes into that algorithm? Are there other data sets or inputs specific to you that you want to make part of that algorithm? And there's also this idea of a fox guarding the hen house potentially, right? So are you comfortable with that? But there is no question in my mind. They're already doing things where I think there's already an option to set up a target ROAS, right? And it has kind of worked okay in some places, not worked in a lot of places, but we fully expect Amazon to go that direction. The way we intend to add differentiated value, even if Amazon went that direction, is one, provide you with a level of analytics and data ownership that you don't get today. And two, expand the inputs that are going into that AI model at a much faster rate than what they might do, right? But yeah, I mean, the risk of where we sit, the risk of Amazon coming up with an AI model to manage your bids has always existed, will always exist. And we have our internal thesis and points of view on how we can continue to add differentiated value. But yeah, great question. Certainly a top of mind concern where I sit as a founder.
Perfect. Well, I think we are just about out of time, but thank you so much to everybody who joined.